I think it's running. Okay.
Mic's on.
Ooh, yeah, the mic's on. Good. Thanks. I think it's all working right. Anyway, so I tried to do an outline that would fit this easily. The outline, I think, is the best thing to do is go through it like I do before, and I promise you we would. I think a lot of stuff becomes very clear again when you do the outline form and you look at the stated teloses, unstated teloses, because there are in John. We find those. And the most interesting thing is we actually have, I said a logos. It's really a theory statement, a theorem, right? A theorem. The question of the question here we get, and I probably should have been looking more closely for them in the other dialogues, because I'm certain, since they follow a Greek kind of setting, although the Greek setting doesn't really, until Aristotle. Aristotle is past Socrates. Socrates is about 300 BC. And then Aristotle is a little bit further past that, about 220 or 250 BC. So until Aristotle, you really didn't get this idea of a theorem statement. And even then, it's kind of, what do you call it? It's not like Aristotle set in place the scientific method. Here's the 5 steps, or here's the 4 steps, like, your kids get in school. That's what they teach them today. Remember, the Greeks don't think that way at all. We're really cool about that because we want intro, body, and conclusion. We want the 5 steps. We want the 3 steps, whatever it is. The 3 steps to managerial success, right? That's what they sell you all the time. But the Greeks would not, that's just not Greek, right? But we do get a logos, a theory statement. A theory statement is asked by the apostles, the disciples. He says, they see a man blind from birth, and they say, who sinned, this man or his parents? Which I think is a really interesting question. Jesus tells them the man couldn't sin. And that's a great Greek answer, because the Greek answer is, of course, it's impossible for the man to sin unless, and I put this really doesn't, it is a refutation of the idea of original sin, in the sense that Jesus himself states that the man couldn't sin. The man didn't sin, right? From a Greek standpoint, it's impossible, right? Because he wasn't alive to sin. And if you remember, in the Greek or the Hebrew worldview, you have to reach the age of accountability. Girls 12, boys 13, and always, with pubic hair, because that's their culture and society. So, and I shouldn't probably put it in these strong of terms, but this is logically a refutation of the idea of an original sin, because Jesus says the man, it wasn't his sins. Therefore, what's the unstated telos? It would be his parents' sins, right? And Jesus refutes that. Only his parents could have sinned to cause the sin, but Jesus refutes that. And he says, this is a stated telos, in order that the toils of God would be illuminated. In other words, in order that the power of God would be shown. Now, I want you to see this. This is a foreshadowing. The foreshadowing of this is, think about, let's make sure we don't forget this. I'll try to remember to go back over this, but we have a logical, a theory, right? A theory statement. Theory statement. Who sinned, the man or his parents? A stated telos, neither. It's not, the man didn't sin, his parents didn't sin. It was in order that the toils of God be illuminated. By the way, what does that mean, the end telos, whether stated or unstated, of the dialogue must be?
Jesus is God?
No. That the reason was that the toils of God be illuminated. In other words, the reason is that it shows God. right? Now, the ultimate unstated telos
Because Jesus is going to come and do this
would be that
amazing
Jesus
work
is
on
God,
the- Yeah,
right?
coming up, he's going to do it.
That would be an ultimate, but the end of this, look, here's the theorem. Who sinned? The man or his parents? The stated telos that Jesus tells us, neither. Okay, do you see that's an irony? Neither. You guys are wrong. It's not
You have the wrong question.
the answer is this is to show the toils of God. And therefore, what is the end of the dialogue? To show the toils of God. So in other words, what are we going to see proven through the entire text?
But to show the toils of God is saying that he's going to heal him, because otherwise, if the guy was blind and nothing ever happened and he died, is that really showing the toils of God?
Actually, that is not the end.
Okay.
The end isn't the man being healed. The end is, the end is what we'll see. You know what the answer is. I'm not going to answer. We'll get to it because it's even better. It's even better than that. It's not just the man is healed. Whether the man is healed or not is immaterial. Whether he can see or not is immaterial, even though it provides beautiful comic relief through the whole of this dialogue. You know, it's like I said, this guy is the second smartest in the Gospels. I'll put the woman at the well, you know, the Samaritan woman, she is the smartest. This guy is next to that, and it's astounding. He gives us a stated telos at the end under Jesus. Now, there's even more in this that's really important because Jesus gives a stated telos. This is in order that the toils of God, that God's power, basically that God be shown, illuminated, right? Okay, God be illuminated. Jesus says, night is coming when no one is able to toil. Now, I think this is interesting. Look at the next statement. I shall be the source of light. God illuminated. I shall be the source of light. What did he just say? Well, that he's God. But then, I am the orderly arrangement. I am the cosmos. Ego eimi, the cosmos. All right. As long as Jesus is in the cosmos, he is the cosmos, right? So when is the only time that night could be?
When there's no God.
When there's no God, which is going to happen, right? So people get all whacked about this. You know, night is coming. When is that night going to be? This is a foreshadowing, both by John and by Jesus' words. It's going to be when Jesus dies. Because how can Jesus die if God didn't die, if the Holy Spirit didn't die? You know, we don't even begin to think about this, you know, but Jesus did die, right? Was it spiritually dead? Physically dead, yes. That was the night. That night is coming where no one is able to toil. In other words, but I shall be the source of light, and I am the orderly arrangement. So in other words, as long as Jesus is there, the cosmos is cool. He is the cosmos. That's even cooler. That's such a great statement. And he is the source of light. But we knew this. Why do we know that he's the source of light? Who said that at the beginning? Yeah. John, right at the beginning. So Jesus made him to see. He spat on the ground, made clay, anointed it on his eyes. We talked about this before. Jesus said, lead under, go to Siloam, and he did. And he could see. So Jesus made him see. I mean, this is the semeion. This is the sign. What's really interesting is then we get the neighbors. The neighbors said, is he not the one sitting down and asked for alms? But other neighbors said, he is. Still others, he is similar, but not that one there. He is similar, but not that guy. Right? I mean, this is funny. He argued ego eimi, which is really interesting because, as I told you, this is the only other time when someone states ego eimi, as far as I know, in the Gospels. I don't think we're going to see it. We don't see it in any of the other Gospels. This guy is the guy who says, I am, which is the absolute statement. And what's really interesting, when we were in Italy, the Italian lady who was giving us a tour, where was she? In Santorini or something anyway.
Yeah, it was Greek.
Greek?
Yeah, it was in Greece.
Was it in Greece? I thought it was in
Santorini
Italy.
is Greece.
Well, I thought the lady in Italy, she said, we Italians don't like to say am. I am. It's countercultural. We always say we. And she was telling us why in English she always said we, but not I. And I thought that was really interesting because it is reflective of the cultures, usually not Latin or the Italians as much as the Greeks or other cultures. But most other cultures do not use, Middle Eastern cultures, Asian cultures especially, and the older cultures, ancient cultures, do not use the direct identity forms. Anyway, so very interesting.
Socialist either.
What's that?
I said neither do socialist cultures. I wonder how much that had an effect.
Could
They don't like
be.
to say everything's we as a group, the collective.
The collective. Oh, that's not, yeah. Well, you got the royal we too, right? Anyway, he argued, I am. They all asked, how were your eyes open? And he told them, okay? And they asked, where is Jesus? I stare not at him. This is really neat because this is a statement of irony because he couldn't see before, now he can see. And they said, where's Jesus? I don't know. I don't stare at him. I don't see him. So they took him to the Pharisees. Now this is interesting. You know, if you look, there's a lot of stuff going on here, right? They took him to the Pharisees because Jesus made the clay and opened his eyes. Even if opening his eyes is a-okay. There's in the Mishnah, you can cure people. Doctors can cure people. Even today in Orthodox Judaism, the doctor can come visit you, or you can go to the doctor if you're sick on Shabbat, on the Sabbath. However, the big deal was, what did Jesus do? He made clay. Making clay that's anathema. That's doing work. You can't do that. Now, you might read into it, well, a doctor doing an operation or a doctor doing his work, right? No, he made clay. They took them to the Pharisees because Jesus did this on Shabbat. Already there was some issue, but remember how Jesus handled it? He slapped him down, right? When before he healed. The problem with healing, it wasn't as much the healing in the other one, right? He told the man that he healed that and walk all around. Oh, so he got the guy to do something that you shouldn't have done on a Shabbat. Now, if you were a good doctor, you'd argue what? It was for healing purposes, of course, right? Therapy. Anyway, I think it's really interesting because, you know, the thing that probably got him the worst was making the clay, not healing necessarily. Like I said, the Mishnah allows it. The Pharisees asked, and the man answered. Some Pharisees said Jesus is not from God because he doesn't guard the Shabbat, the Sabbath. He's not following the Sabbath. He can't be from God, period. Okay. Others, he who misses the mark makes powerful signs. It's interesting. They concluded that he sins, right? But then here's the thing. He makes powerful signs. By the way, that fact, what is that? What do we call that? That is an indirect proof text, right? This is something that really is funny to me. When your enemies say that you're doing, like, let's say, a powerful sign, what does that mean? You are making a powerful sign, right? If they had said, well, he doesn't do anything, you might come back and say, oh, the disciples just misinterpreted, right? He was like one of those healing dudes that goes on the TV and says, you know, rise, brother, right? And yet they concluded he does powerful signs, right? Which means they knew it. That's an affirmation. It's considered an affirmation of a textual affirmation, and it's a real great proof text. This is why when I tell you, when you get the Mishnah sources, the other sources from the written Talmud, where they dispute Mary or dispute the virgin birth, that means that what was the question? It appears like he had a virgin birth and we had to do something about it. So therefore we made up this great story about her being raped by, a legionnaire and leaving the child Jesus, which makes Jesus part Roman and part Jewish, which, right? I mean, you can't make this stuff up. It's hilarious how,
Does the Mishnah ever mention the signs as well?
I'm sorry, the Talmud does, but not the Mishnah necessarily. The Mishnah, remember, is the oral Torah written down, but in the Talmud, yes. The Talmud, they talk about Jesus in the Alexandrian, there's an Alexandrian form, and I think it's Alexandrian, I've had some quotes from it before, where it talks about Jesus being a sorcerer. And, there are also parts that mention Paul. They call him the man who shall not be named, like Voldemort. Voldemort, right? He apparently added some of the arguments in the Talmud, and so they basically they took his name out, woohoo, which is also a proof, right?
So that's cancel culture.
Yeah.
Big time
Yeah.
cancel culture. Remember, they didn't write down the Mishnah or the Talmud until about 100 AD. So obviously it was resonating even then, right? Because we get sources from about 200, about Jesus being a sorcerer, about Mary, about this, they even named the legionnaire. They made up a name or got a name. It's really interesting. You go to the Vatican, and on one side they have the guy who shoved the spear into Jesus' side, and then they have one of the saints, a female saint on the other side, in the statues, and he's got a name. And yeah, there's a whole bunch of this stuff. I don't have a really good grasp of some of this, although I did a lot of research for writing Centurion, but I only did the research necessary to write the book. It's not like I did a whole, canvas of all the legendary ideas and stuff about the time, although I do know a lot about the ArchCode documents. But it's interesting that there is a body of data that, supposedly, I don't know, I have to ask my kids, the Catholic, parochial schools used to teach the kids all this stuff. And so when you come out of parochial school, you should have all the good knowledge that you should really have when you came out of school in a government-controlled school, but you should have all this good knowledge about, the past, the apostolic fathers and other things, I think, anyway. And many times including this, we would call it legendarian kind of data, but who knows, right? How accurate is it? I don't know. It's kind of like the ArchCode documents. I think the reason it let the ArchCode documents out is because we don't know how the historicity of the documents, right? We may have one or two, and that's it. One or two copies or one copy. Is it pseudographia? Is it fake? Is it made up? It's hard to prove, right? And they're the only ones who are holding the documents. But, to keep it from getting a problem, and plus, some of them are really negative about Mary and Joseph, which you'd expect, right? Gamaliel writes a letter to the Sanhedrin about meeting Mary and Joseph and talking to them. And he says, yeah, Mary's kind of, Joseph's not too bright. He's okay. He's a good worker or whatever. But Mary, whatever. But what would you expect from your enemies, right? Especially Gamaliel going to talk to Jesus, Mary, and Joseph. Just saying, I think there's more proof text in that than negative. You know what I'm saying? When your enemies write, if your enemies write something, okay, if I were to get a letter from Gamaliel to the Sanhedrin and everything was in glowing terms about Jesus and Mary and Joseph, what would you say? Yeah, it's probably a fake. Exactly. But if I got one from Gamaliel, I mean, either the guy is a great forger with a great fiction mind, which, by the way, they didn't have in that era, right? And he's making up great stuff, or it's true. Which side do you want to be on? And I'm just saying that's really cool information. Anyway,
It's like those that mocked Jesus when he was on the cross, saying he saved others, but he can't save himself. Well, they just said that he saved all those other people.
exactly. You know, and what's really funny is the Greeks hearing this, right? They pick those things out. Why? Because it's cultural. They understand it. We don't pick it out. Why? Because we've heard it.
Right.
How many times have we heard it? Right?
Wasn't until probably this class or something. Well, I was long an adult before someone pointed out what that. Oh yeah, that means that even his enemies were admitting he was helping people.
Bingo. Just like the Pharisees. They say he's sinning, right? Why do they say he's sinning? Because he made clay and he opened eyes on the Shabbat. And they also knew that he had told the guy to carry, he healed the guy and told him to carry around his thing. That is what they're saying. That's why they're saying he is sinning. We think they're just saying he's sinning because whatever, they're saying he's sinning. No, they're saying he's sinning because he's breaking Shabbat. That's the sin right there. So that's the sin. That's the split. So he's making powerful signs. That's an admission. I think it's a wonderful admission. You need to point it out to everybody. They asked, here's the trick question. They asked, did he say that he was a prophet, basically? Did Jesus tell you he was a prophet? Why do you think they're asking that question? If he's a prophet, is that safe or unsafe?
Well, they've got a lot of prophets, so I guess it's okay for them to admit prophets, but not the Son of God.
Usually when a prophet says he's a prophet, he may or may not be a prophet. Probably not, right? So they're asking this question, did he say that he's a prophet? Because if you claim that you're a prophet, remember what, this is a society that doesn't say I am, right? Ego eimi. So I think that's a little bit, they're trying to get an admission. But the other side that we're going to hear about is a big deal. What does Jesus claim? What did he claim before the Samaritan woman? That he was
Living water.
the Messiah, the Christus, right? The Christus, because that's what people are saying all over the place. They're not saying, some people are saying, yeah, he's a prophet. Most of them are saying he's the Christus. That's the deal. And by the way, we're going to see that really quickly. So there was a split. Is he a prophet? Nobody will answer the question. They want to answer, of course. Do you notice it changes from the Pharisees to the Judeans? I think this is very interesting because that when it changes from the Pharisees to the Judeans, what does that presume? Who just joined with them? Who do you think joined? What's that?
A crowd?
Could be the crowd. I think it's not the crowd, it's the Sadducees. They brought him to the Pharisees, to the synagogue, right? And the Pharisees are asking him questions. They ask, is he a prophet? And the next thing it talks about is Judeans. I think what the Pharisees did is, who did they ask to come visit? The priests.
It says, my note says, by the word Jews. In Greek, laudeoi probably refers here to Jewish religious leaders and others under their influence in that time.
Yep. I think that they brought him to the Pharisees, and the Pharisees said, okay, we want to get in cahoots with the other dudes. Let's call in the Sanhedrin, the priests, right? So it transitions from Pharisees to Judeans, and it uses Judeans all the way through until we get to the very end, which is an interesting statement. It says the Judeans were not convinced. This is an important statement. They weren't convinced that he had been blind and could see until they asked his parents. So they go ask the parents. The parents come down, and the Judeans ask, is he your offspring born blind? Was he born blind? And they say, yeah. And how can he see? How can he see now? The parents said, our offspring, and he was born blind. We don't know who opened up his eyes. And here's the thing, we don't see him. I love this Greek, physical eyes, stare at, see. In English, we translate this as we don't know him. That's your translation says we don't know him. It's like, or we don't know who he is. But the Greek says we don't see him. This is an irony. This is beautiful satire. It's like Jesus from the beginning of time said, hey God and Holy Spirit, we're all one, right? We're gonna have this great semeion, this great sign, and we got this guy who's blind from birth. I know it's sad he's blind from birth, but that's the way the world is. But this is going to illuminate, right? The light of the world. So in this, we're going to make him blind because in Greek, and we know about Greek, even though it's the beginning of the world, the beginning of creation, this Greek has these great words about physical eyes, about staring at, about seeing. And we're going to use those because they're wonderful puns and they're also really great satire. And we're going to put those into this text. And it's not going to be just really cool, but it's going to be really entertaining. And it is entertaining. Look at this. We don't know who opened his eyes. We don't see him. And by the way, we don't see what? The guy who opened his eyes, and we don't see who else? Our son. Ask him. He's of age. So, they were alarmed of the Judeans. And here where we get the thing, because they were alarmed because if people called Jesus the Christ, they were going to kick him out of the synagogue. Right? So this is a deal. They said, is he a prophet? If he said he's a prophet, yeah, they might get in trouble. But the big deal is that he says he's a prophet if they said he was the Christ. So they did not, okay, you see what's happening here, right? I love the Greek, right? Don't you wish we had this Greek? Maybe we could use this in English too. Who broke the lamp? I don't see him, right? Your kid can answer. You can answer your mom. This would be a great thing to answer. Anyway, so the Judeans, they didn't get anything out of the parents, right? It's really cool. They say, ask him, he's of age. They called for the man. And they said, you give doxa to God. This Jesus misses the mark because he made clay. He opened eyes. He did other things on Shabbat. He doesn't keep the Shabbat. That's how he misses the mark. Okay, and the man says, if Jesus is missing the mark, I don't stare at it. I don't see it. Why? Number one, he didn't see Jesus when he healed him, right? He was blind. Jesus put clay on his eyes. He didn't see any of it. I didn't see it. I don't stare it. In other words, I didn't see him break Shabbat. That's good. That's really good. Isn't that really good? Okay. I stare at because blind, now I look at. Because I was blind, but now I look at. This is a beautiful irony. I mean, I wish we could do this. I don't think anybody's done this. When we do all these in the movies, what are they? Totally serious, right? They're totally serious. Here's a man born blind, and he's, answering in a serious way to those serious Judeans and those Pharisees, right? But you see, there is just beautiful word things going on here, right? And it even gets better. It gets better. I think this is just an astoundingly good if I were teaching kids rhetoric, or especially about dialogue, this would be one of the things I would teach. I think this would just be beautiful.
It seems funny. So he's healed other people, but there's never been this court of inquiry before where they harassed the person that got healed and all the. It's funny that it's now they're doing it. Was it because so many people knew that this guy was blind?
I think the thing is, remember, there are like basically 8 or 9 signs in John, right? John was answering the rest of the story to, I think, a Roman and Greek audience that really wanted to know not just what happened, but they wanted to know the dialogues, right? They wanted to know what Jesus said. To the other guys, Luke's just writing, kind of a history, right? Little dialogue, just history. Matthew, more to kind of the Hebrew thing. Remember when we looked at Mark, Mark's kind of, not outline, but, they got dialogue, they got thing. But the big deal is that they list a whole bunch of, Simeon, miracles, where John goes to the teeth. And if you look at every one of the miracles that John talks about, every one of the signs, the Simeon he talks about, there's always the sign, and then we get a dialogue, right? It's answering what the Greeks and the Romans to a certain extent, but the Greeks and Romans really wanted. They wanted to know not just the sign, but what happened within the context of it. So, it's not, I think, I don't remember if this is in the other gospel about the man born blind. There may be some touch, but I don't remember offhand. The most important thing, though, is that each one of the signs, right? We see a sign, we see an extended dialogue that has unstated teli. Really cool stuff going on. Judeans asked, in what way did he open up your eyes? Well, what? He already told them, right, before, and they already know from all the other things. The man says, I said to you, I told you how, and you have not heard. You weren't listening. I told you already, you weren't listening. This is a joke in itself. Why anew do you desire to hear? Why anew do you not desire to hear? Why do you not want to listen to me? And do you desire to be his disciples? In other words, since you're not listening to me, what is the inference here? What does the unstated tell us? That you want to do what? Hear what?
Hear it from him.
Hear it from Jesus. See, this is a great joke. Okay, I know we're not into jokes in the Gospels, but this is a funny thing. The guy says, I told you and you didn't listen. Why do you not desire to listen to me? Do you want to be his disciples so you hear it directly from Jesus? Which is, their answer is this. They made verbal assaults and called him, you are Jesus' disciple. Claimed that he was Jesus' disciple. We are disciples of Moses. This is an irony. Do you remember what Jesus told them before? That whole section we had that's broken by the fake section, the Gnostic section. And we had a whole section, and the bottom of the conclusion was, they said, we are children of Abraham. Remember that?
We've never been slaves.
And we've never been slaves, which was a direct lie. Jesus calls them on it, and they change their tune, and they say, we are children of Moses. Remember that? And then Jesus slams them about that. So there's an irony here that the hearers are automatically get, because they go, they've already been through this, right? We've already had this argument. They said, you're Jesus' disciple. We're disciples of Moses. But Jesus has already slammed them on that, right? So it's really funny. And I think it's really amusing that before they claimed to be disciples of Abraham, sons of Abraham, called on that lie, right, about not ever being captives or not ever being slaves. And then, triangulated, so to speak, over to we're sons of Moses. Now they're calling themselves not sons of Moses, but disciples of Moses. Woo-hoo. Just very interesting. we tend not to see this because we don't look, we look broadly. We're English speaking, English understanding people. We are not usually, this is especially true of me. I'm not a tree person, I'm a forest person. We tend to look at stuff from a forest vantage point, right? Looking up from the thing. But the Greeks, what do you think the Greeks are? The Greeks and the Romans, forest people, or are they like individual tree people? They're big time tree people. Every word that they put in there means something, has a direct connotation. It's not like our euphemistic love. No, they give you what kind of love it is. Exactly, right? Is it phileo? Is it warrior love? Is it, agape? Is it the love of the gods? It's very specific. They do that with what they say as well. And this physical eyes thing is just, you see this all over. See with physical eyes. They say, this is what the Judeans say. We see with physical eyes that God uttered words to Moses. How do you know that? Because what they have the Torah. They literally see with physical eyes that God uttered words to Moses because they have the Torah. What's really interesting about this is, okay, the Pharisees believe in the Mishnah too. I told you they probably invited the Sadducees, the priests, to come down. The priests do not hold to the Mishnah nor the Talmud. They only hold to the Torah. So it's, who's probably talking here? It's probably the priests, the Sadducees. Anyway, we see physical eyes that God uttered words to Moses. We do not see from what place he is. What is that? Where did that argument get basically buried?
A couple chapters ago, didn't we? They already where is he from?
Yeah, it's a previous dialogue.
Vernon?
So it's almost like, it's really hard to tell. I think the previous one were mostly Pharisees. I can't remember exactly. But it's almost like we're regurgitating the same argument all over again. And what do we know as readers? If we're Greek readers. What do we know about this argument before? Who won? Who won this argument before?
They know where Jesus is from.
Yeah, they all know where Jesus is from. Well, they lost the last dialogue. The last dialogue, they got slammed. And again, this is a referral back. Remember, I told you the hearers of this had probably heard Matthew at least, maybe Luke, maybe Mark. We don't know. They had probably at least heard Matthew. But even if they hadn't heard Matthew, who told them about Jesus and where he was born and all this other stuff? Where did they hear about that? Yeah, from Paul, from Barnabas, from Paul, from Mark, from Apollos, from all the people that were preaching and talking to them about Jesus, right?
Maybe the shepherds that were there the night he was born.
Maybe even the shepherds, whoever was talking, right? They knew, and this is a joke, but it's basically what it is, and you'll see this in Greek dialogues. You'll see this if you go back and look at the Platonic dialogues that Socrates has. You'll see this occasionally, where you'll have an argument that Socrates totally wastes somebody on. And then what do they do in the next dialogue? They bring it back up again. And the point is, it's a point of ridicule. In Greek thinking, when you won a rhetorical argument, when you won an argument like in a dialogue, right, what's the best thing to do? Well, the best thing for you to do if you lost is to sit down, shut up, and not say again, right? The best thing.
Something else. I don't know.
Yeah, find something else to argue about, right? But what you said is right. What you do is you ridicule the person. It's a method of ridiculing them by bringing up a subject that's already been decided, completely decided. And by the way, the Hebrews know this too, because in the Talmudic sources, that's one of the things they do as well. Once you've decided, a Pharisaic argument, you say, is it okay to walk around the city of Jerusalem? Only if there's a rope around it. So what do? Put a rope around it, right? We put a rope around it. We check that rope. Make sure we check the rope. Because if you open the rope, it's like going through a TSA checkpoint and you open the rope to sneak through the other part. No, they'll put you in jail, right? So anyway, they made verbal assaults. You're Jesus' disciple. We're disciples of Moses. They said, we see with physical eyes, God uttered words to Moses. We do not see what place he is from. So they're regurgitating. But what this does is it provides a argument, a point from which the man can then give an expression. Because he says, it's marvelous that you don't stare at what place he is. He opened up my eyes. You see this? It's marvelous that you don't stare at what place he is. He opened up my eyes. In other words, he's saying that who knows where Jesus is from? Everybody knows where Jesus is from. He even knows where Jesus is from. He heard it. You get this? They're saying we don't see from what place he is. He's saying, I don't have to see from what place he is. But he opened up my eyes, and therefore, because he opened up my eyes, I see. Okay, these guys get it. The Judeans get it. We see with physical eyes. We see with physical eyes that God doesn't bless those who doesn't allow those who miss the mark. Contrariwise, reverence the determination God hears.
That's the man still saying that.
No.
He said, he's still talking. He says, we know that God does not listen to sinners. But if anyone is a worshiper of God and does his will, God listens to him, and so on. And then it's after that they said, you were born in utter sin, and cast him out. That's the man saying that.
I think it's ambivalent in the Greek. I know that our translators kind of do the thing, but I'm
Because he's still arguing. Never since the world began has it been heard that anyone opened the eyes of the man born blind. If this man were not from God, he could do nothing. So it's still the man arguing that he's from God. And he's trolling them, as he has been all along.
I think you can look at it either way, but I think that it's, when we looked at it, especially, I said, this is a little bit ambivalent. It's hard to tell because the Greek doesn't say, it's like all the Greek dialogues. They don't say that Plato says this and Socrates says this or whoever says that,
it
right?
Does say it says they answered him, and then you were born in utter sin.
Well, we can look and see what the specific, which one is this?
It's verse 31.
30.
30 to 33 is when he's
30.
talking.
No, it's the Judeans. It says in the Greek, we see with physical eyes. There's no way he would say we. He would have said I. So it's not in, if the translation tells you it's the guy, or if it's expressing it's the guy, it's not. It's Judeans because it says we see. So he's not using the royal we.
But then the Judeans would be saying if this man were not from God, he could do nothing. They would be arguing that Jesus is from God. But
Well,
it even says in the text, though, the man answered then the things that he says, and then they answered him.
the
So
man
it
concluded
delineates
for
who's
himself,
talking.
and he said to them, "Sign reason in this marvelous, it is that you do not stare from what place he is, and he opened up my eyes." And today it says, we see with physical eyes that the God hears not of those who miss the mark.
Right? He says we, like all of us who have been taught, the Torah or whatever. He's saying that all of us know, we all know that God doesn't listen to sinners.
I don't think so. I don't buy that. It's the Judeans saying this. we see that God hears not of those who miss the mark. In other words, they don't listen. So in other words, even though Jesus is doing these miracles or did this miracle, where did it come from? They already said this before. Where did they say Jesus came from? Satan, right? Said he came from Diablo. So I would say this is the Judeans. We see the physical eyes that God hears not those who miss the mark. Contrariwise, if someone reverence towards God, towards the God, and the determination and active will of him, he does of him, he hears. And this is an irony, though. Okay? I think that the Judeans, well, I don't think, the Judeans are saying this because they're using the we, they're using plural. And so what they're doing, though, is they're answering the man.
Does it change, though? I mean, if you go back to it, does it change how the point of it, if it's the Judean saying it or he's saying it? I mean, just read it as if he's saying it, and does it really?
Then when does it go back to the man if this is the Judeans?
The next one is the man, because it says the next one is the man. This is what I'm saying. In the Greek, in English, we, and generally
They don't make that clear delineation. He said, she said.
They may not, yes. Although we do see it, we see it most of the time, right? They say, but the reason they say it, like for example, they'll say that he answered, or they'll say he concluded for himself, or they'll say he femied, or that he remied, or that he logos, right? They'll give us, if it's important for them to tell us how it was said, they'll tell us that.
So in 930, it says the man concluded for himself.
Yep.
So it's the man.
Yep.
Yep.
And then we're in
And then,
34.
Yeah, 34 is they answer. And he's trying to argue against what they're saying because they're saying he's a sinner, he's broken the Sabbath, but he is saying God listens to this guy. He can't be a sinner because he healed.
Yeah, I think either way you can look at it, but it uses definitely the we, and people don't, individuals don't, I don't generally say we unless I'm talking about a group that I'm, my royal we or whatever. But
As a Lutheran.
yeah, Lutherans, we Lutherans,
Like all the Jews.
Yeah,
Through the
he's
physical
saying
eye.
he's including them. Like we all know that. Like even you teach that God does not listen to sinners.
Well, you could just address this later. You could
Yeah.
go back and look at your work. Do you have all the Greek, your Greek thing where you show?
Well, I'm just saying,
All
yeah,
the chart.
it uses we. So
I mean, it can go either way. It's clear.
But at the end, I don't know that it changes the
I
argument
agree.
at all.
Yeah, it
Whether
doesn't
we
yeah,
said it
I
or
don't
they
think it
said
changed the argument. The thing that's funny about it is if either way you look at it, it's an irony. It is a wonderful irony because he goes, whether you want to say it's the Judeans, I think it's Judeans because they use the we, or you say it's the guy, he says, we see with physical eyes. God does not work with those who miss the mark. So this could be the Judeans saying, well, God, obviously doesn't work with miss the mark, so therefore it's Satan or it's evil that's healed you. Contrariwise, reverence, determination, God hears. There is multiple ironies and multiple unstated telos in this, because if it's the guy or if it's the Judeans, right? Either way, it's still an irony and multiple unstated telos because it's self-proving, right? A couple of things. Number one, they know it's not really miss the mark, even though they're claiming he missed the mark by doing work on a Shabbat. And then the other one is that he healed the guy. He can see. And so the next statement definitely, I think, is the man, or not think, it's the man, because it says, no one has opened the eyes of anyone born blind. No one has ever opened the eyes of someone born blind. And if Jesus was not from a God, and it uses the term a God, he could do nothing. So in other words, that is your unstated telos in that context, right? Therefore, Jesus must be from a God, which is a very interesting statement itself, because it doesn't say the God, it says a God. So the Judeans, and here's the telos, the stated telos. They say, holy and miss the mark, you were born. You teach us. You're trying to teach us. And they threw him outside of doors. Actually, they say, you teach us. You are teaching us. So they threw him outside of doors. They threw him out of the synagogue. That is the ultimate point right there. No one's opened the eyes of anyone born blind. If he was from a God, he could do nothing. He is holy and missed the mark. In holy and missed mark, you were born. Therefore, remember, what's the theorem?
Who
Did he
sins?
sin or did his parents?
Right. And Jesus said, neither. What is the answer of the Judeans?
He did.
Holy and missed the mark, you were born. If you want a proof for original sin, it's right there. The Judeans, but they didn't believe that. That's really funny. That in itself is a irony, because we know they did not believe that, right? They believed in the age of accountability. That's their culture. That's their whole society. That's their whole life. So if they were to make this conclusion, this is a radical, departure, a radical not misstatement, it's a direct statement. But what are they doing? They are contradicting, right?
Because they're losing. They got to throw out something to try to salvage their argument.
Bingo.
They're not. They don't have any logic left.
Right.
They have nothing left. Exactly. And that,
name calling.
Yeah.
Yep. Ad hominem.
remember, already they made verbal assaults,
Yeah.
right? And then they're still, it's just they've lost. They've totally lost the dialogue.
They're probably looking really bad in front of everybody else.
Yeah, exactly. There's a
They
crowd
were called in
watching.
to support their buds, the Pharisees.
Yeah,
The whole point was to throw him out of the synagogue in the first place.
I think they want to throw the parents out. They want to throw everybody out. They want to get Jesus too, right? But they end up with this guy, and he goes, Holy Miss Mark, you were born. You're trying to teach us. They threw him outside of doors, which I think is really funny. This is almost like I said, we will see this again, but this was a foreshadowed thing where Jesus makes his exact statement, ekbalo, to throw out of doors in terms of other kind of stuff. But anyway, so that's kind of ended, but the dialogue continues. It says, Jesus found the man. So he just specifically went to find him, and he said to him, are you persuaded into Christ? Are you persuaded into Christ? Now, okay, what did they say? Why did they say they were going to kick somebody out of the synagogue? Because
They confessed Jesus Christ.
So Jesus asked him, are you persuaded into the Christ? Now he uses the terms to the Son of Man, but the Son of Man we know is a code word for the Christ, the anointed one. Anyway, and the man says, who is he? Now, has this guy ever seen Jesus?
Probably after
I'm
Jesus
assuming,
healed.
when Jesus opened his eyes, Jesus was right there.
But didn't he say,
No,
go
no,
wash
but
your
he sent
eyes?
him to the
Oh,
pool.
that's
The
right.
pool wash.
No,
Oh.
But he knows his
I forgot
voice.
that part.
Yeah. See, this is a part that okay, you guys are all super smart English and you love stories. I know you love to read, but you notice this is a sparse. What would we do in English? We would say, Jesus found a man who'd never seen him, only heard him speak, right? Because we know that he had sent him off. He's never seen Jesus.
That implies
Yes.
somebody led him. He couldn't have walked around with mud on his eyes to get to the pool.
Well, he could have. I mean, he can't see anyway.
Right.
Right?
He's been doing that
He knows
Okay,
what's right.
He's been missing the pool of Siloam for his whole life. He's like, wait, ah! Right? So he's been missing it. He knows exactly where it is. He may have taken a drink from it, hopefully not after whatever. Anyway, yeah, so are you persuaded into Christ? This guy doesn't know Jesus. Maybe he recognizes his voice. It doesn't say. We have no idea. The man says, who is he? You are looking at him, hearing him. He is. Beautiful statements. The man immediately says, I am persuaded. He kissed the ground, prostrated himself to the ground. And this is what he says, which is really interesting. Wait, where am I missing? The last part? About the Pharisees.
Yeah.
Am I missing the last part about the Pharisees?
Yeah, verse 39. For judgment I have come into this world so that the blind
Man,
will see.
because I already fixed this. Oh, yeah. I got it right here. So, I am persuaded. He kissed the ground while prostrate. It doesn't tell us this guy knows that Jesus healed him or anything, right? He is confessing that Jesus is the Christ. He is prostrating himself before him as if Jesus is a God. That's unstated to tell us. And Jesus makes it tell us. He said, I came into the cosmos that they not looking at may look at, and they looking at may be blind. This is really an interesting statement. Jesus just already told us, and I wrote in cosmos, but Jesus told us that he is the cosmos. Ego eimi, I am the cosmos. But then he makes a statement, I came into the cosmos that they not looking at may look at, and they looking at may be blind. Now this is really interesting. Jesus' Pharisees. Jesus had Pharisee followers. Now we don't know, it doesn't tell us. Are these the guys that were giving the man the problems? Are these just the hangers-on with Jesus's, guys? Are these Pharisees that are Jesus' disciples? It doesn't, we don't know. We have no idea. But it says Jesus' Pharisees that are following Jesus around. We are not blind, hence we are blind. You are saying that we are not blind, therefore we are blind. And Jesus makes this statement. If you were blind, you would have no miss the mark. You would have no sin. If you were blind, okay. Do you see how this goes way back to the beginning? When they said, who sinned? And Jesus said, neither. The Pharisees and the Judeans concluded that the man was born in sin. Jesus says, if you're blind, you don't have sin. Now, I don't think he means that in the context of there's no way that you could ever be a sinner. But if you're blind, you can't miss the mark, which is a total irony, right? If you're blind and you're trying to shoot an arrow at the target, there's an irony. That's a huge irony. This is a beautiful irony. This, I think, is so typical of what we see in especially Matthew, Mark, and Luke, as opposed to John. We don't see as much of this irony as we do, like, for example, in the Sermon on the Mount. Sermon on the Mount is full of irony. But this is just a pure irony. But you argue, we look at, therefore your miss the mark remains. In other words, your sin remains because you argue that you look at. Okay, now I don't know if the next verse that's cut is, and all the Pharisees ran away screaming, or what it is. But this is a really interesting point. In other words, he's saying that if you say you know, right?
If you claim that you're wise or whatever, you're on the hook.
And I don't think Jesus is making the statement that if you you know, it's okay for people to have knowledge and express knowledge and know knowledge and everything else. But the very Greek view here is, you know, do you see how the Greeks would be totally upset with these Judeans and the Pharisees that we're talking about that were interrogating the man, right? Why would they be so upset at them?
They're not logical.
They're not logical. Exactly. There's no reasoning. The reasoning is not there, right? And so I think what Jesus is telling them, it doesn't matter what you know. What matters is what you can reason with what you know, right? The blind man had no miss the mark because he was really a wise guy. He was smart, right? But it's not like he was trying to say, oh, you know, I know everything, right?
Because it's like you said, it's not wrong to have knowledge or wisdom, but obviously you want to. But they had appointed themselves the arbiters for everybody else, which Jesus often criticized them for, like, you're going beyond what is written and stuff. And here they're doing the same thing. They appointed themselves arbiters, saying Jesus is a sinner because he made this mud and blah, like, but does the Torah really say that? So, like, when you're arrogant like that and appoint yourself to the top, then you're on the hook.
Yeah, and back to and I know I'm a little bit over, but back to the whole point. Remember, what was the theorem? Who sinned? What's Jesus' conclusion?
The Pharisees.
Yes, it is. It's the Pharisees are the guys who miss the mark, and they're the ones who can see. We stare at, right? You argue, we look at, therefore we're in sin. Beautiful, Ari. Thank you, Father, for your word. We pray you look after us this week. In your name we pray, amen.
So we know that all